Hello, brubs. We're back with the After Midnight Ghost Book, a 1981 Franklin Watts compilation of supposed ghost stories, though most of these are not scary and they're not ghosty and they're not particularly memorable. Michael Levy, Unsettled with Outbreaks of Rain. Mr. Carter slipped his tightly rolled umbrella into the narrow, darkly polished shaft of the umbrella stand deftly, and with his customary satisfaction, as if replacing some precision tool in its protective case. Despite the forecast, he had not needed to open it during the day. But his satisfaction lay deeper. In that first action of replacement, every evening was symbolized his own slipping back into the perfect fit of his environment. It never ceased to give him a combined sense of relief and pleasure. And though there no longer came the gentle, cheerful, unquestioning query of, "Is that you, Herbert?" from the bedroom at the end of the corridor, he still felt the flat exuding a positive welcome as he paused in the hall on his return. It was 4 months since his mother had died. Over the period, sporadic letters had continued to arrive from widely scattered, dwindling members of the once large family, some of whom he scarcely recalled from his childhood, and who only just had the news passed on to them. Sad she was bedridden so long, so devoted to you, hard at your age, though always a blow, naturally thinking of you. Must be yours since we met. Must be years since we met, pardon. Ever this way, do visit us. To each letter he scrupulously and truthfully replied, avoiding any commitment to seeing the writers and extending no invitations, however vague, to them. He thanked Cousin Doris and the rest at Ruslip, but silently declined to share her amazement at Philip being now 19 and employed in a bank. To Louis in Canada, "I think you knew I married again after Sam's death." He simply included respects to her husband. Young Arthur and Hazel had written to him as Uncle Herbert, which was not strictly accurate, but he felt it right to sign himself similarly when replying. Sunday was the day he set aside for answering letters and paying bills. He liked to sit at his desk in the living room of the quiet Battersea flat. He thought carefully before composing the accounts of what his feelings were, increasingly reassured at finding that his state of mind did not fluctuate. "Mother's death," he wrote, "has grieved me deeply, but it did not come as a shock. We were very close, though she never attempted to run my life. I always went abroad each year for holidays on my own, and though she always enjoyed seeing my photographs, photography was never an interest of hers. Fortunately, she suffered little pain and kept her good spirits up to the end. I believe hers, like mine, could be called the contented life. Nellie, whom you may recall from when we lived in Streatham, came in to look after her, and is only too anxious to go on being of what help she can." He thought he had told them enough, and if it all sounded a little remote, that was not because of him, but because his correspondents were remote, emotionally at least, as much as physically. Privately, some of them had probably smiled, as he knew colleagues at the office did, at the son who remained in middle age, unmarried, and living with his mother. Unpleasant things might nowadays be said or hinted, and if the bedridden woman hadn't turned into a querulous, nagging tyrant, the son ought nevertheless to experience at her death a tremendous sense of either relief or loneliness. He felt neither. Being alone was something he was well used to and savored, even at the office. He had, after 27 years, not made any particular friends, though he had plenty of friendly acquaintances. The flat was inevitably emptier now. Of course, he missed going down the corridor every evening in response to the clear call that greeted him. Yet he had told his mother about his day to please her rather than himself. In that way, he saluted her sense and courage in saying nothing about how time passed for her or about the condition of her body, which seemed oddly to bulk larger in the bed as daily she grew progressively weaker. It was true that he had secretly dreaded her actual death, as perhaps she guessed, and it was their one time maid, Nellie, who was present when she died quietly in mid morning on a weekday. He had decided to remain in the flat and leave it largely unaltered, with the furniture and pictures he had been familiar with since his childhood. The then already old fashioned mahogany chairs, the blue enamel and glass domed clock, and some framed sepia reproductions of such subjects as King Cophetua and the beggar maid and Hope. The only change he planned was in his mother's narrow bedroom, abruptly confronting him now almost as a threat to become the spare room. Yet, although he had never envisaged a use for it, he rapidly realized how suitable it was to accommodate all his photographic equipment, including his projector and the cabinets of his slides. Tonight he looked forward to mounting a batch of dramatically fiery sky studies taken by him recently from the bathroom window as it faced west and the weekend autumnal weather happened to be unusually brilliant. He could imagine mingling them with some of his best alpine studies and defying anyone to believe they were not taken from the lower slopes of the Matterhorn. As he paused in the hall, he was irritated faintly to notice three letters lying on the mat. Until recently, there had seldom been any post for him except bills, although he would not deal with them until Sunday. He resented tonight even having to read letters. It was a relief to find that two were in fact no more than demands for the telephone service and the water rate. The third envelope was pink. Cheap was the word which occurred as he fingered its flimsy exterior, and he did not, I repeat, recognize the childish handwriting. He kept it unopened, incurious and uneager as he changed his shoes for slippers, took off his jacket but kept on his waistcoat, and then went to the corner cupboard in the sitting room to pour out a glass of medium sherry. Once it had been an evening routine for mother and son to take a glass together, but Mrs. Carter's years of illness had long ago eroded it. He had resumed only on the evening of her funeral. As he sipped, he slowly opened the envelope and unfolded the sheet of pink writing paper, decorated on one side at the top with a spray of lily of the valley. Dear Mr. Carter, he read, you may not remember me, but I used to work at the office before I got married. I've kept up a bit with Mrs. Neal, and she told me of your sad loss, and I just wanted to write and send you my sincere condolences. Your mother must have been wonderful. I knew you thought a lot of her. Please forgive this letter in haste, and believe me, yours truly, Joan of Archway. P.S. I am a mother now, two boys and a little girl. He remembered it all instantly, even while he scanned the letter again, realizing that she had, accidentally or not, omitted her address. On learning that the new rough spoken red headed girl in the typing pool was called Joan and traveled home on the underground from Archway, some would be wit, Dickinson in accounts probably, had christened her in a style that had stuck. That by itself would hardly have interested him, but the girl did. Or rather, to be precise, it was she who first unexpectedly showed an interest in him. It was 10 or even 12 years ago. He could recall the day she left after a party and a whip round organized by the other typists. He had wished to stay away, but she had worked for him, quite apart from going out with him several times. It had been awkward, slightly humiliating, furtive. Nobody, he felt, must know. He had said nothing to his already ailing mother, but to Joan of Archway he had implied her shock if she were ever to learn of it. With an effort, he checked his memory from running on vividly, effortlessly on and back. He got up as though by moving he might halt the process, and it seemed temporarily effective. If only he had her address and could, when calmer, send her a reciprocal bulletin which briefly, though firmly, showed where he stood. Or if only, he thought as he went into the kitchen, she had not disturbed him by writing at all. But after supper, the effect of her letter had worn off. Absorbed in the tedious effect of her letter, oops, absorbed in the tedious, finicky process of mounting and labeling slides, he grew soothed again, and the spell of the flat around him reasserted itself. It was good, too, to feel that it was entirely his. The extra room could always be used to show slides in, should he decide to invite somebody to come and admire them. Perhaps he never would, but the idea was strangely pleasant to consider, and it sent him to bed in his usual tranquil mood. He woke once suddenly in the night, wondering what had woken him, and then hearing the soft, insistent sweep of rain on his bedroom window. Normally, rain made the traffic noises louder in the room, but this night they seemed infrequent, virtually inaudible, and only the steady downpour against the glass filled his ears. The street looked dry enough the next morning as he made his way to the bus stop, carrying his rolled umbrella. The surprisingly warm sun had perhaps dried them early, and untypically he had missed the weather forecast. Wonderful for the time of year, isn't it? A middle aged woman in the queue burst out enthusiastically as they waited. I do hope it lasts. He nodded politely, but by lunchtime he half expected it to have clouded over. But in fact, by then there was a glass like glitter about the streets and an almost Edvardian leisured look to the parks, where the trees had barely begun to turn, and formally suited figures like himself strolled before going back to their offices. 3 days later, the weather changed just as he had foreseen. The mornings and evenings were misty, and the atmosphere damply autumnal. The forecast had spoken of it becoming unsettled, with some sunny periods, but even so he was startled, even mildly alarmed, to find himself woken once again at night by the increasingly heavy murmur of the rain. When he woke, there was a pause. He lay there in total puzzled silence, and then, as though turned on by a switch, the sighing, trickling sound penetrated to him. Soon it was pouring outside, rustling in the gutters, and streaming noisily over the window pane with a force suggesting pails of water persistently flung at the glass. No windows in the flat were open, he felt sure, reluctant to move, and yet thinking he ought to check. The rain beat down with vehemence, seeming uncannily close at hand, and he had a sense of the thinness and ultimate frailness of brick and stone to exclude the elements. The block was early post war modern, and he suspected poorly built. Twice he had to write to the landlord, an openly indifferent property company, about drainage problems. Such torrential rain as this might easily overflow a block pipe or gutter, and he felt thankful that at least on the first floor his flat was well away from the roof. Rain at night was conventional. Let me start that again. Rain at night was conventionally soothing. He could recall listening to it, drizzling down lightly on a summer evening in his childhood. As he dozed in a half darkened bedroom and heard his parents hurrying and calling, half laughing, in the garden below. Those cushions will get soaked, his mother cried, and he had known she was smiling. He too had smiled into his pillow, pressing deeper into the bed, under the thin sheet, feeling intense happiness at his drowsy yet godlike awareness of the rain. His parents out there alone, almost playing together, and the house extending shelter to them all. The rain falling now was dense, increasing, flooding his ears oppressively, and somehow washing his mind into unwelcome activity. It could rain hard enough in the Alps, he knew, but he had never much minded, feeling rather contemptuous of tourists who expected every day to be of serene picture postcard blueness. Tonight the rain seemed positively tropical in its steadiness and inevitability, as though setting in for weeks or even months. He suddenly felt he could not sleep until it stopped, yet some sort of pride made him hesitate to put on the bedside lamp and read. He never suffered from insomnia. He could hear himself curtly saying as much to Mrs. Neal of the typing pool when she feebly attempted to explain some erratic typing he had sent back. Sylvia's been sleeping badly, I believe, she had confided, worried over something domestic. Her grandmother lives with them, she added inconsequently, irritating him out of his usual calm demeanor. Sylvia was a blonde who always looked to him pert, healthy, and cheerfully indifferent about her office work. She was a cartoonist's idea of the sexy typist, though she was by no means as young as she appeared, and strangely remained unmarried. She must have been quite junior when Joan of Archway arrived, he thought, annoyed to be thinking at all of life at the office. He had been planning to work late one evening when Joan of Archway tapped on his door. "Some of us are going across the road for a drink, Mr. Carter," she said boldly. "We wondered if you'd like to come." He had glanced up at her bright green blouse, her red hair, and her big, rather inexpressive, almost peasant-like face. "Thank you," he began, declining stiffly, seeking for words to indicate without actually snubbing her that it was not correct for a typist to approach an official in this way. "Oh, goody," she replied, disappearing and leaving his door open. "You were funny," she told him weeks later. "In a way, you still are. Are you afraid of me?" "We are both afraid," he ought to have said. It was one of many things he had thought but failed to say. Her apparently easy, confident air vanished as soon as they were alone together. She became serious and unsure, nervous in restaurants, and even more when once he took her to the theater. She listened solemnly when he spoke of his mother. She never called him anything but Mr. Carter, and he had hesitated to tell her his first name. In the darkness of the bedroom, lying there as if exposed to the ceaseless impact of the pelting rain, he felt a shameful longing to see her again. Mrs. Neal would be only too glad to provide her address, but he knew that in fact he would never ask for it. Besides, she was married, a mother with 3 children of her own. He was beginning to wonder what those children looked like. Did they have their mother's red hair? When he awoke again, it was a dark morning. It was a dark morning. He was much later than usual in getting up, but at least there was no sound of rain. Oh no, I'm stuck. As he hurried down the stairs, he found himself awkwardly overtaking crippled Miss D, limping slowly from step to step, clutching the banisters as she descended, with her stick crooked over her arm. She lived in the flat above his, alone since the death of her mother from cancer several years before. Like him, she took the bus to an office every weekday, but out of some foreseen mutual embarrassment, each always chose to go and wait at a different stop. Good morning, he said rather too loudly, as if sounding a warning of his approach, and abruptly halting just above her. She paused for breath before returning the greeting. Go on, she half articulated, half gestured with her free hand. Don't let me delay you. To pass her was awkward, as indeed was everything about Miss D, as far as he was concerned. He could never help glancing at her thin, paralyzed foot, fixed at a painful, unnatural angle, parallel now to the stairs. From her exuded a loneliness, under the neat exterior and brisk, would-be cheerful manner which he felt he ought to assuage by an invitation to tea one weekend, all the more as he lacked any longer the excuse of an invalid mother. Dreadful downpour in the night, wasn't it? He said, shuffling a further step closer. She looked faintly puzzled and then smiled apologetically. I'm afraid I don't hear anything. I'm such a sound sleeper. Still, I don't think it's wet this morning, and that's a good thing. She drew back against the banisters with the resumed smile of invitation for him to go by, and he hastened past her, mustering thanks, glad to be free of the constraint. Outside it was gray and uncertain, but, as she had said, not wet. There were not even puddles to pick a way through to his own bus stop. That evening, when he returned home and placed his rolled umbrella in the stand, he experienced a sense of relief stronger than usual. The hall was empty of letters. He felt tired, understandably enough, but it was Friday. The weekend routine waited for him almost as palpably as did the flat, demanding nothing but to be savored. On Saturdays he shopped and cleaned before preparing a special supper for himself. He had no sympathy with people living alone who complained they couldn't be bothered with cooking properly. On Sunday mornings he enjoyed a walk. He thought it sensible exercise in Battersea Park, walking fast, not pausing or looking at anything in particular. If he thought at all at such times, it was of being again in the Alps, of day-long walks he had taken or planned to take, always with his camera. Sunday afternoon and evenings were the times he liked best, when he had leisure to go through his accounts, write any letters, rearrange his slides, or even set up a screen and project some of them. He had already started shifting the cabinets of slides previously in his bedroom into his mother's, a room he was beginning to label the workroom, but with more space he could consider more elaborate arrangements. He could improve his system of indexing the slides. He could keep a screen permanently set up. These and other possibilities floated to him in the hall with the piquancy. How do you say that? Piquancy? Piquancy of a real flavor, almost like the faint odor of a meal being cooked for him by his mother in the days before she was ill. For some reason, he suddenly thought of Mrs. D, whom it would be so easy to invite to tea, even supper, on the Sunday, but he decided that could wait until he had finished all the re-indexing and arranging of the slides. And by the evening of Sunday, he was glad the weekend had passed as usual, without any interruption. Moving the last slide. How long does this go on? Jesus. On and on it goes. Cabinets had proved unexpectedly laborious. There was altogether less space than he had supposed in the room, though he was pleased by having thought to hang on the walls some of his earliest successful color photographs, including several views of and around Lugano. The room was beginning to look at once businesslike and private, professionally efficient and yet snug. He closed the door on it, feeling fatigued in a pleasant way. There were still things to do, but they would provide occupation for other Sundays during the winter, and when all was completed there might be the opportunity for inviting Miss D. It was just as he got into bed and turned out the bedside light that he heard the first swishing sound of falling rain. The day had been mild and dull, too warm really for the time of year, he had thought, feeling rather clammy while working. With the sound curiously disturbing in his ears, he got up again and went in the dark to the window. He stood there listening, irritable and shivering a little for no reason. He hesitated about opening the window, but there could be no doubt of the gushing, steady, streaming noise, though he could distinguish nothing through the glass. It remained puzzling unless some pipe or tap was leaking somewhere in the block of flats, and with an abrupt, half angry gesture, he threw open the window to locate the source. The street below was quiet. A very slight sheen on the road might have come from rain, but seemed only reflection from the lamps suspended overhead. He screwed up his eyes to try and detect the rain slanting against the brightness, but nothing was visible. At last, cautiously, and fearing that he looked ridiculous standing there in pajamas, he extended one hand into the night, tensing the skin against an expected splash. His hand remained dry. Perhaps he had not leant out far enough, or perhaps the noise was of water running down the side of the building. He slowly pushed his head out into the darkness, twisting to glance upwards and apprehensive of suddenly being drenched. He could see the glow of several windows, some with curtains undrawn, and the clear edge of the pale roof against the night sky. No rain was falling, and there was no sign of a burst or overflowing pipe. The building looked tranquil enough, though insubstantial, like a piece of cardboard with cut out holes for windows. The air was crisp, almost chilly, and the night seemed touched with a vague suggestion of approaching Christmas. Mr. Carter withdrew his head sharply, trembling at the thought of some other tenant noticing his peering out at such an odd late hour. Yet when he had shut the window, he found he was trembling more violently. He recalled those other recent occasions when he had been convinced he heard it raining. He saw again Miss D's somewhat surprised face on the stairs and the dry road outside, and now it seemed to him that he had, without thinking, said something about the wet weather to a colleague at the office, who appeared equally surprised, yet he knew he had heard rain falling. He had to rest his head on the sill, and the slight pain from pressing his forehead against the woodwork was a welcome, almost reassuring sensation. His whole organism grew concentrated in an act of not hearing. For a few seconds it seemed to have succeeded. As if terrified of jogging into motion some precariously balanced inner machinery, he crept slowly towards the bed and slid between the sheets. Then, as he lay there rigid, the rain very softly began again. Momentarily he could have wept at the sound. But it was important not to call it rain. It was merely a recurrent noise. He tried to calm himself by saying, it might be caused by something to do with his ears. It might be some unwelcome, though not dangerous, form of singing in the head, which a doctor could surely deal with. Nothing wrong with my ears before he could envisage declaring to a doctor. No history of headaches, he would add firmly. Perhaps it was a mild manifestation of highs or even low blood pressure. A course of pills would soon correct it. And though even when he folded the pillow around his head the noise persisted, he felt less frightened. On the Monday morning, he was still bewildered. His behavior seemed slightly absurd, as did the intention to see a doctor. By the time he joined the incipient queue of one man at the bus stop, he thought he had dismissed the occurrence of the previous night and of the other nights as well. He wondered if it wasn't caused by lying in bed at a certain angle, or more probably by the faint catarrh which he always suffered from in the winter months. He could almost smile as the bus arrived and the West Indian conductor leant, leant, that was leant from it singing, "Lovely morning, and all you lovely people. First two only, please. There's another one just behind." But he felt much less patience at the office when Mrs. Neal began to describe how a rainstorm had spoilt her niece's country wedding on the Saturday. He cut her short so abruptly that she flounced offendedly out of the room. He began to notice a new dislike for the topic of the weather. At work, he seemed surrounded by people who spoke of little else. Without admitting it to himself, he had started to avoid noticing the forecast. And though a week went by undisturbed by any noise, during the nights he felt he had passed hours lying in bed awake, half listening or trying not to listen. Even his return to the flat was spoilt now by moments of apprehension. One evening he came in and began his normal routine of changing into slippers when he heard unmistakably the sound of rain, heavy, beating rain, on the window he had just curtained. He sat there unwilling to move, afraid and made weary by his fear. It was like the recurrence of some illness, the thought when at last he dragged himself across the room. The drumming on the glass behind the velveteen curtain was almost human in its peremptoriness, as if commanding his attention. It was more than any noise in the head. He knew with a sick inevitability, and it would never leave him. To draw back the curtains and discover that it was actually raining outside had the impact of a magical event. The spattered glass and the glistening rods of rain falling steadily in the radiance of the street lamps made a beautiful, blessed sight. Yet the overwhelming sense of relief frightened him by its intensity. He realized how close he had been to utter despair, and what lingered was the nagging awareness that not until he looked out had he been able to judge whether the rain was real. Every so often that night he woke with a start. The noise of the downpour would penetrate his sleep, and he had to remind himself, as it hissed around him, that this time it was a reality. All the while he dreaded the next time, remembering the night he had bowed his face to the window sill close to the dry pane, tremblingly trying to exclude the sound that crept insidiously into the room and into his head. By morning he was exhausted. He felt too listless to look out and see if, in fact, it was still raining. To leave the flat had become an impossibility. He had a duty to remain there. It suddenly seemed to protect it and to protect himself. Quite calmly, he took up the telephone. He had a slightly feverish cold, he was telling the maddeningly slow receptionist. He was telling the maddeningly. He was telling the maddening. I can't say it. Maddening. I don't even think that's a word, is it? Maddeningly. This says maddening. Slow receptionist at the office. You sound a bit under the weather, Mr. Carter, she said cheerfully. I hope you'll feel better over the weekend. Learning it was Friday was somehow a shock. For once, the promise of his weekend routine had no appeal. He knew instinctively that he would not go shopping on the Saturday nor take his Sunday morning walk. There was plenty of tinned food in the flat, enough to last for several days if necessary, and besides, he lacked any appetite. After trying to eat an egg for breakfast, he just sat in his dressing gown in the kitchen, hearing the unaccustomed sounds of weekday activity in the block, but listening for the approach of that threatened other sound which was bound to come. From the landing outside came a chink of bottles. The milkman was going his rounds, which meant that it was getting late in the morning. Miss D would long ago have made her painful descent of the stairs. At the office there would certainly be some mild surprise, since he was so seldom ill. The thought of illness made him abruptly active. He had a plan. If he kept all the windows not only tightly shut, but contained, he need not bother about the weather outside, or torment himself by uncertainty if and when he once more heard the rain starting. With sense of establishing a permanent retreat, he went round his new With the sense of establishing a permanent retreat, he went round his few rooms, drawing the curtains and switching on lights. Only at the workroom did he pause. It hardly seemed worthwhile going in there, since he felt he would not be using it for some time. It would be enough to lock the door. When he had finished, he stood in the hall and considered the front door. It seemed best to lock that as well, though first he hastily darted on to the landing and brought in his pint of milk. Haste was making him nervous. The bottle nearly slipped from his hand as he carried it into the kitchen. Before he put it away, he remembered the wooden device hanging there and rarely used, with its dial that signaled so many pints of milk, and had a space reading, until further notice. Or is that 0? But it says O. He reopened the front door and placed it outside. He walked very quietly back into the bedroom, straining to detect the faintest sound, but there was total silence. Without quite relaxing, he was soothed by his precautions. He switched off the light and lay down. After a while, he dozed. Occasionally, there filtered through noises of traffic or some loud conversation on the stairs, but these too faded as he lay there. Time is passing, he thought, and nothing is happening. But then the sound usually came at night. That was when he must be most alert for it, and he guessed he had dozed only into the afternoon. He got up, oddly hungry. He made himself some toast, and then, after a pause, opened a tin of beans and cooked them as well. Normally, he despised such meals, unless it was in an emergency, and perhaps this occasion was. He felt increasingly pleased, almost excited, at his own state of readiness, though unclear beyond this feeling. As long as he preserved his attitude, it seemed nothing could reach him. He need see no one or hear anything. By keeping the curtains drawn, he had cheated time, but after finding himself unwillingly glancing at his watch, It read 4:30. He realized that posed a threat. For a moment, he contemplated smashing it. Of course, such an act would be wrong, he knew. He unstrapped it from his wrist and went out and carefully put it still ticking in a drawer of his desk. The electric light struck his eyes as hardly. I can't read. The electric light struck his eyes as hardly required. He knew his way around the flat well enough, and it was altogether easier to concentrate in the dark. He turned off the lights as he went along to the bathroom. This time he got into bed and slept soundly. He slept, although he had not meant to, and woke knowing he had slept soundly. In the darkness he sat up alert, tilting his head, listening. There was silence. Now he saw the process as a cure. It might take days to achieve, but it was working. What was essential was darkness, complete concentration, the restriction of his own movements. That was the routine he must follow. Whenever he woke now, he tried to begin with a period of listening. Then he would shuffle slowly down the corridor and grope his way into the bathroom or the kitchen. Once or twice he was disconcerted to find how bright it appeared. The blind in the bathroom fitted poorly and did not entirely exclude the daylight. The plastic curtains in the kitchen were thin and partly transparent. As he stepped in there, he was vaguely puzzled by its unexpectedly grubby state. With the bread bin half open and a pile of unwashed cups and glasses littering the sink. Later he must attend to that. Meanwhile, he fumbled for some biscuits and carried them back to the warmth of his bed. It still happened occasionally that he woke with a start, or perhaps was not sleeping as deeply as before, yet only silence awaited him. He could not gauge the intervals between sleeping and waking. But that did not matter, since both seemed tranquil enough if blurred. Outside it could even have snowed, he thought once, but he felt no urge to check. The silence accumulating around the flat was much more important and reassuring. At some point he believed the telephone might have rung, or perhaps he dreamt it. It came from so far away that it did not disturb him. He had stopped the conscious act of listening. Nothing reached his ears. And then he was bumped, painfully awake with his heart beating wildly. It had begun again. He knew immediately, even before the sound itself impinged on him. He lifted. I can't read. I really need to stop reading anyways. I'm tired. He shifted in the gritty, limp sheets, desperate to locate its whereabouts. At first it was a mere trickle of rain, not close at hand, but as he strained to hear it, he realized with horror that this time it was falling inside the flat. Unthinking, he tried to jump out of bed, encumbered by the dressing gown, which he had forgotten to take off. There better be a ghost here at some point, because I'm really getting sick of this. This must stop, he wanted to shout, or was shouting. After all his precautions, the silence and the cure had been broken. Now he was more furious than frightened. He ran into the corridor, but paused before putting on the light. He had taken such care to exclude the noise, and as he recollected his new routine, it occurred to him that after all he might easily have left a tap dripping somewhere in the darkness. Yet, while he stood there, the noise was increasing in vehemence, no longer a trickle, but a savage, thunderous roar of driving rain. It came from behind the workroom door. He rushed towards it, thinking angrily of an open window or a burst cistern. Miss D's in the flat above. He could hear the splash and cascade of water pouring down the walls where his photographs hung. Everything would be ruined. The room was already, the room must already be awash, he was sure, as he wrenched and pulled at the door. It would not open. His fingers slipped on the handle, as if that too was wet. He leant breathlessly against the door and heard through it the endless drenching sound of the rain rebounding on the surface of his cabinets of slides. It's no good, he whispered to himself, feeling his face damp where it touched the woodwork, and still tugging at the handle, but now without real force. It's no good. Inside, the deluge seemed diminishing, though drops of water continued slowly to fall. He found he was kneeling, huddled beside the door. He made no further attempt to open it. He wanted to get up, learn what time it was, what day it was, but he could not move. Silence had returned except for the harsh, tearing sound of his own breathing. He went on holding the door handle in a convulsive grip. As he knelt, a new sensation began to pervade him. Water was seeping steadily from under the door, fearfully chill on his legs through the pajamas. Only then did he realize the futility of fighting despair. When the door swung open, he swung with it, aware of the pool he was pitching into. His fingers slid from the handle, and his body fell with fatal heaviness on the dry floor beyond. I gotta say that this book is absolute dog shit. It really is. That was not a ghost story, and I mean, it was barely a story. About ready to abandon this goddamn book. That's all. Goodbye, bruv.